Every year, thousands of human remains are found in the United States, and in one of every 4 instances, authorities can't identify the body. That's starting to change. I'm Dave Killen, co-host of The Unidentifieds, a new limited series podcast from The Oregonian and Oregon Live. We go deep into several cold cases and explain the science that's helping experts give these long-forgotten people their names back. Look for The Unidentifieds after you've finished listening to this podcast. Subscribe to The Unidentifieds on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey, what's going on, Giants fans? Daryl Slater here with Bob Brookover with the latest episode of our Talk is Cheap Giants podcast from the Star Ledger, NJ Advanced Media, NJ.com. Tuesday, May the 2nd here in the morning as we're talking to you. Coming out of the NFL draft, Giants offseason is complete. Free agency done, draft done. We'll go through real quick who they drafted. Obviously, you all know that. And what it means going forward. Scheduling wise here coming up, the Giants have a rookie mini camp Friday and Saturday this weekend, May the 5th and 6th. Their first OTAs, organized team activities practice, really spring practice, is May the 22nd. So that is in, about 3 weeks. From now, that's the whole team getting together. Of course, probably not Saquon Barkley, not Dexter Lawrence. And that's where that is. The Giants unsurprisingly exercised the 5th-year option on Andrew Thomas today, which is the deadline day to do it. Could get a new contract this offseason, maybe next offseason. That's where they're at. And the schedule, by the way, May 11th, Thursday evening, it will come out next Thursday evening. And we'll do one of these on Friday, next Friday, the 12th, talking to you quickly about the schedule, going through our picks. So that's the calendar of things coming up. But as we look back to the draft, obviously you guys know what the Giants did. Deonte Banks in round 1, the cornerback. He'll be the number 2 outside corner. John Michael Schmitz, the new starting center in round 2. Jalen Hyatt, an intriguing deep threat, kind of slottish receiver in round 3. And then 5, 6, 7, 7 are their next 4 picks. They go running back Eric Gray, cornerback Trey Hawkins, defensive lineman Jordan, I don't know if he goes Jordan or Jordan Riley, and Jervarius Owens, a safety from Houston, with the final pick. So that's where the Giants are at coming out of the draft. Bob, what'd you make of the draft overall?
I wrote this, and I believe it, that Joe Schoen aced this draft on the first 2 days. He had needs. He didn't reach for his needs. And he got 3 guys in the first 3 rounds who, depending on what you were looking at, were either Deonte Banks was a definite first rounder. Some had him going much higher than 24, where the Giants took him. If there was any criticism of this draft, it was, did the Giants have to move up 1 pick to get Deonte Banks, or could they have just sat at 25 and gotten him? That's a pick and a nit. And then John Michael Schmitz, some people had him in the first round, and they got him at 57 overall. They didn't even have to move. And then they moved to get Jalen Hyatt. Some people had him in the first. A lot of people had him early second, and definitely at least in the second. He got all 3 of those guys. When Joe Schoen was asked on Saturday, if we told you you'd get Banks, Schmitz, and Hyatt in the first 3 rounds, what would you have said? And he said, how can I do that? So he's happy with it. After that, whatever they got after that, we all thought they were going to take a running back. They traded out of the 4th round to get Hyatt. They took a running back in Eric Gray, who does have the ability to catch the ball and could possibly be a guy who spells Saquon Barkley if and when, and we all expect that he will be back with the Giants. And I think it's important that the Giants do lighten Saquon's workload some in the future, starting now. So maybe this is the guy who helps him do that. You go down the list to Trey Hawkins, you get another cornerback who seems like a really good athlete. Maybe you can turn him into get the athletic ability to match up to the football ability. You never know in these later round guys. And Jordan Riley's just a huge, huge human being who will, maybe spell Lawrence, but they're certainly set on that defensive line now. And then Javarius Owens is the only safety they took in this draft, which was good news for probably Bobby McCain and Jason Pinnock, who will likely be competing for a time to play opposite Xavier McKinney. That's my wrap up quick.
That's a good thumbnail sketch of things, and we'll go back and revisit the impact of each of these picks and then kind of contextualize it big picture with position battles and things like that leading into the spring and training camp. Again, even though OTAs are 3 weeks away, the roster is set. So my takeaway here, I mean, the Giants came into this offseason with 11 picks, right? And so there's a chance they could make this a volume draft. They did not. It wound up being a 7-pick draft, and it was very top heavy. Picks at 24, 57, and 73, and then not again until Eric Gray at 172. So this is the type of draft you make, and you're aggressive like this when you're a win now team with holes that need to be aggressively filled, and that's that sounds bad, but whatever. Overlook that. Joe Schoen had to be aggressive here. So he traded a 3rd-round pick for Darren Waller. He traded a 5th and a 7th for Deonte Banks. He traded a 4th for Jalen Hyatt. So the haul was 7 picks and not 11. And so, maybe you go volume when you're in a state like they were last year when they're just looking to build out the depth. But when you're a win now team, you need difference makers, immediate difference makers. And that's what they're hoping these top 3 guys in this top heavy draft can do. So it's a win now type of approach, an aggressive type of approach, a targeted approach as they try to address these roster holes. And so that's really my overall takeaway on this draft. And we'll just start at the top of it. Deonte Banks is going to be, and we'll talk ripple effects here too. Deonte Banks is going to be their number 2 outside corner, right? I mean, they can talk all they want about competition, but I'm sorry, but Aaron Robinson, Nick McLeod, they're not beating him out for the number 2 job. So
they're competing for Darnay Holmes' job.
Correct. Yeah. So really what happened here is, the Giants did get a number 2 outside corner to play opposite Adoree Jackson, Deonte Banks. And so all the guys who were in the mix on the outside, you have Aaron Robinson, Cordell Flott. They can play in the slot. Remember, Aaron Robinson was drafted the year after Darnay Holmes. And so he can be a slot guy. So the slot job is now up for grabs. Holmes, Robinson, Flott, maybe Nick McLeod there. Obviously, there are going to be other guys other than Banks at number 2, but he's going to be the starter. So the question then becomes, we'll address this. So what do you make of, number 1, Banks' chances of playing well as a rookie? Not maybe like Sauce Gardner level, but acquitting himself well. What do you make of his chances doing that? And also, what do you make now of what is a crowded competition at slot corner?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's fair to compare Deonte Banks to Sauce Gardner. Is a much higher pick, but a terrific athlete. Has the 2 things you want in a cornerback is size and speed. So yeah, I mean, I think the Giants would be disappointed if he didn't come in and show as at least an average NFL starter in his first season, and also an upgrade over what they had last year, which was a mix and match combination of Fabian Moreau. They had 4 guys play really that position last year, and Fabian Moreau started with Aaron Robinson, who was playing okay, when he got hurt, but it was such a small sample against 2 teams that are terrible at passing the ball. So you had Aaron Robinson, you had Fabian Moreau, they tried to give the job to Flott, he didn't take it. Nick McLeod played pretty well, given that he was not a big name, a guy they got off the street from Buffalo. You had 4 guys playing that position. At the very least, you want Deonte Banks to be better than those 4 guys played the position last year. And as far as the competition, Darnay Holmes would be the guy. If I was Darnay Holmes, I'd be getting myself as ready as I could be for this training camp, because there's going to be guys wanting his playing time, because those other guys got a sniff of playing time, a lot of playing time last year. Speaking specifically about Flott and McLeod, so they're going to be hungry to continue to play. So that will be one of the more interesting competitions in camp.
I think as you look at Banks, he's a great scheme fit. He long can play press man coverage. That's what they want, and that's what they need in this defense. And so I think it's a great fit from that perspective. He's obviously going to be challenged by opposing quarterbacks, given that Adoree Jackson is the alternative on the other side. There's a very clear difference between those two players right now. But remember, Adoree Jackson's entering the final year of his contract. Perhaps they view Banks as a guy who can be their number one corner, perhaps, maybe starting as soon as next year if Adoree Jackson leaves. So it's going to have to be a quick learning curve for Deonte Banks, and he's going to be asked to do things in this defense. But he's going to be asked to do things in this defense that he's comfortable doing. So quick learning curve, but I think the system fits his skills well. Obviously, that's why you draft the guy. As far as the slot goes, I think, Aaron Robinson's roster spot is in jeopardy. The guy hasn't done anything through 2 years, largely because of injuries. He's now at a position where, look, they're not keeping 3 or 4 slot corners. Like, where does this guy fit in? Darnay Holmes is pretty exclusively a slot corner. Robinson can be a backup on the outside, but he's got to prove he can be healthy and reliable. They're not cutting Flott. They just drafted him last year, so he's got outside slot and slot versatility too. And Nick McLeod acquitted himself pretty darn well last year, so I would be surprised if they move on from him. So Robinson could be the odd man out here, depending on how camp goes. And look, Darnay Holmes has not been exactly a star for them. He's played, but it's not like he's played consistently great. And so there you go.
They can cut him for basically nothing. It's the cap hits like $200,000. So.
Exactly. Right. That plays into it too.
Right.
And so I think that's where I think they are at those 2 cornerback spots. We know that Jackson's one. Jackson's going to be Jackson where he is, and then McKinney is there at free safety. And you touched, I think, on the other safety spot with what they do with McCain or Pinnock there. That'll be an interesting position battle. We don't need to delve too far into it. It's pretty straightforward. They got Bobby McCain on a 1-year deal. Pinnock was there last year. He played at times well. Dane Belton, again, they're not cutting Dane Belton, but he could be the odd man out in terms of playing time. But we'll go down the list here by the draft picks so there'll be a little flip flopping. We'll go about the offensive side now. So John Michael Schmitz, the new center, right?
might be even more so than Banks. Might be the most important pick they made.
Hugely important.
You think about 2 things since Daniel Jones has been here. All the different coordinators and head coaches he's had, but he's also never had the same center back-to-back years. It was going to be Nick Gates the 1 year, and then he had the devastating injury. So he's gone through a bunch of centers during his career. The Giants are trying to build it. They were considered, even going to the playoffs last year, considered one of the worst offensive lines in the league. They're trying to build that offensive line. To me, and I've always been an outsider looking in from afar, but like whenever I remember great Giants teams, they had great offensive lines. This guy, just the little bit of exposure we've had to him, seems like the right guy to be a leader on that offensive line. Seems to have the right personality that you want from your center specifically. I just think this could be a really good pick, and this is, finally have the guy at that position around for a while.
Very important pick.
I look at the Giants' history as centers, going, and I'm going to show my age here, but going back to Bart Oates, a guy they got from the United States Football League, who I think should be in the Hall of Fame. That was the start of the great Giants teams of that era, getting a player like him. And obviously they had other great guys around on those teams, but I always thought of the Giants having great centers when they were a great team.
And, the last 4 years, they really haven't had, so Nick Gates played pretty well in 2020. John Jalapio, 2019 was their center. Gates in 2020. Then Gates gets hurt, and they have to go to Billy Price in 2021. He's not any good. And then John Feliciano last year, solid but not spectacular. He walks in free agency to the Niners. So they haven't had great center play. It's been uneven and also an inconsistent cast of characters. One center for each of the first 4 years of Daniel Jones' career. So 4 centers. Pass blocking wise, they obviously have to get better. They were 24th in PFF and pass blocking last year. That, a lot of that goes into Evan Neal too. But the whole notion that they were ever going to play Ben Bredesen as center was ridiculous. Come on, give me a break. And so
the smoke screen without any smoke.
Yeah, no one believed that. And so it not just because Ben Bredesen's never played center, but because the alternative at left guard was like Joshua Azudu, who was very spotty last year and is, I think coming off like a neck/shoulder surgery, or at least an injury that ended his season. And so this enables them to play Bredesen at left guard. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a position battle, but probably not much of one. And they go John Michael Schmitz at center. And then, the rest. Thomas at left tackle, Neal at right, Glowinski at right guard. And so this is the best possible outcome for their offensive line, given where it was entering the draft.
Absolutely. I mean, the only thing you might have done is draft another interior guy. But you know what? You wanted one of the 5 best interior guys in this draft, and you got him in the second round. You're talking about the pass protection. It really needs to be better. Schmitz, I think, in 3 years as a starter at Minnesota, allowed 2 sacks his entire career. A ton of passing downs involved in that. And that's not even considered. His strength is considered his ability to block in the running game. So it just, on paper, we'll see how it plays out, but on paper, it just looks like a great pick there.
Yeah, and then a really fascinating pick in round 3 in Jalen Hyatt. I mean, we know Banks will be a week 1 starter. We know Schmitz will be a week 1 starter. I'll be really fascinated to see how Jalen Hyatt fits in. And so as it turned out, Joe Shane did not make really any huge, big splash additions at receiver. But the weapons are upgraded for Daniel Jones. So I think now, improve the passing game. No more excuses. Like, let's go. I mean, obviously they didn't get Terrell Owens in his prime or Jerry Rice, but they're better offensively in terms of skill guys. They're going to have Saquon Barkley coming back. They bring in Darren Waller, who's essentially a receiver. Their receiver room, no, again, it's not spectacular, but they have some pieces there. And Hyatt, a deep threat, a really fast guy, gives them an element of deep threat ability. And I forget what the 20-plus passing number was. But last year, the Giants were one of the worst teams in the NFL in terms of deep, big play passing. I mean, we know that. It passes the eye exam. It tells you, look, we know that this team
actually fails the eye exam, but
yeah, I guess that point passes the eye exam. I was rambling because I was trying to look up the stat at the same time. The Giants had 28 passing plays of 20-plus yards last year, worst in the league. The Ravens were 33 of those passing plays. So yeah, obviously they did not put the ball down.
You brought in a guy like Paris Campbell, who was a second-round pick just a few years back, who couldn't stay on the field. Finally did, and played pretty well. Played probably up to the same standard as Darius Slayton, who, as we know, has been the Giants' leader in receiving in 3 of the last 4. The receiving room is so much improved over last year, which is funny because you had a high-paid free agent and a high draft pick in Kadarius Toney and Kenny Golladay, but they were both of no use to the Giants. So now you have a very different new room, and it's a much better one. And the thing about Jalen Hyatt, I kept thinking in the days leading up to the draft, and it didn't work out this way, but, there were the 4 guys who went immediately before the Giants pick. I kept thinking those 4 guys were going to be the 4 guys that might be gone. And the Giants draft is going to come down to, with that in that first round, are they comfortable with Jalen Hyatt as a first round pick, or will they go in a different direction? They obviously went in a different direction, but then got Jalen Hyatt anyway in the 3rd round. How can you argue with a guy who has his kind of speed? He's not real super big, but he's, another guy, your first exposure to him, his first impression is he said, I think I'm the best receiver in the draft. Hey, he's probably not, but you know what? You want all your guys thinking that. And the fact that he is a good sign. I just like the way Hyatt handled himself in his first media exposure. We'll see what he does here, but it sure looks like they got a value pick in the third round.
Very good value, I think. And you mentioned from 20 to 23, Jackson Smith, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison off the board in those picks. And then, of course, the Giants trade up from 25 to 24 to get Deonte Banks. And so I think very good value potential with Hyatt there. Let's see if he can add some bulk. He says he wants to get to 190. I think he played last year at 175. He says he's closing in on 190 now. Obviously, the speed is a huge element for a team that was looking to add speed on both sides of the ball. You mentioned Paris Campbell bringing some of that. And so, Campbell is, going to be a factor. Obviously, Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins are outside receivers. The slot's a really interesting spot, really a corner and receiver for the Giants right now, because you have Jameson Crowder as a slot receiver. He's kind of an afterthought. But now you have Hyatt, who's primarily been a slot guy. Sterling Shepard, same. But again, they didn't make a long-term commitment to him. Wan'Dale Robinson, they just drafted him in round 2 last year, and they're not going to cut him, but I mean, he's a guy he's got some pressure on him now. Late November, torn ACL. Whenever he returns, I mean, Jalen Hyatt could
he didn't have the surgery until mid-December, so I got to think he's not going to be ready in training camp. So I have to think that played into their thinking some too.
Yeah,
the fact that he's probably not going to be ready. I wouldn't think. Oftentimes they say a year, so we may be looking at November before he's ready to play.
It's a weird kind of receiver room. I mean, because they don't have like a sure thing standout guy. I mean, those are their top 7 guys in some particular order. Campbell, Slayton, Hodgins, Hyatt, Robinson, Shepard, Crowder. Jeff Smith's a special teams guy. So can they do it by committee? Obviously, Waller is essentially a receiver, and they desperately
he's the number one guy.
He's going to be their number one target, basically, in the passing game. And so,
I mean, the Chiefs proved that that's okay last year. Not just last year; they've proved it other years that your tight end can be your number one guy if he's the right guy. And Darren Waller certainly has Travis Kelce potential when he's healthy. So.
The bottom line is, for this team to take the next step, their passing offense has to be more explosive. It has to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's no if they perform like they did last year in the passing game, then there's gonna be a lot of criticism of Daniel Jones, and they're probably not going to go very far this year. So, and they obviously have to pass block better, which we touched on when we were talking about Schmitz and the offensive line. And so, I think that this is it's an interesting Giants offense at this point. Will it be better? I think it probably should be. But you look at this on paper in this receiver room, it's like, okay, they don't have anyone that blows you away, but some of these, there's going to be opportunities for a guy like Hyatt to come in and play a bunch immediately. Well, I'll be interested to see if he's ready to do it. He was primarily a spread guy in college, right? And he said he's played in pro-style offenses, but those college systems are very simplified. They're designed to win games at that level with the players they have. And so I'll be interested to see how he makes the adjustment scheme-wise.
Absolutely. That was one of the reasons he may have slipped. And the interesting thing is his teammate, Cedric Maxwell, went the very next pick after him. So it was like, okay, if the Giants will take this guy, we'll take this guy. We'll take one of these guys too. We'll see what we can do with them. But speed is speed. Can this kid learn the system in a more complicated offensive system? Obviously, the Giants think so, or they wouldn't have taken him. And I got to think Mike Kafka is one of the offensive coordinators, one of the happiest people. He comes from the Andy Reid coaching tree. And if you go back and look at Andy Reid's history, how many times he's been in the top 5 teams in throwing the football, it's pretty much almost every year. So Mike Kafka wanted to open things up, and he did. And he did open. That was part of the Giants' story last year. Early in the season, he played it very close to the vest and relied on Saquon a lot. Teams started to figure that out mid-season, and he started to open things up a little more. Now he's got a chance. Now Kafka has more weapons with Daniel Jones and probably more confidence in Daniel Jones than he maybe had at the beginning, both him and Dable. So they can open it up right from the outset of the season.
For sure. That's a great point, and how this all plays in scheme wise. So like offensively, we touched on receiver and probably the battle coming up in the slot. We touched on the line and where they stand there now. And tight end, we know where that is. Quickly, quarterback, obviously they didn't draft a quarterback, but they signed, and we'll mention him because he's a local guy. Tommy DeVito played at Syracuse, wound up transferring to Illinois for his final year. So he comes in as the Giants' new number 3 quarterback, probably a guy they'll stash in the practice squad. So they wound up not drafting a quarterback, which I think makes sense when you only have 7 picks. So he's from Livingston, played at Don Bosco and Ramsey, Don Bosco Prep. So local ties there for Tommy DeVito. Pretty cool story. In terms of the running back situation, obviously, and we can get into Eric Gray here. As we move down, that he's the next guy in the pecking order. The Giants go 73 for Hyatt overall, 172 for Eric Gray. So big gap there. Eric Gray, 5th round running back. They obviously have let's assume here Saquon Barkley comes around and whatever he plays on the 1-year tag, or he plays the first year of a quote unquote long-term deal. Matt Breida, 1-year deal, older running back. They needed a backup running back like longer term behind Barkley, or like maybe Barkley's not even around next year. But what do we make of Eric Gray as a guy who can be a versatile back? Maybe he's not going to have a huge role, but like as you look at him in a vacuum, what's your sense of him as a player?
Well, you have to think that, when they were drafting a running back in this draft, there was a kid from UAB who had a sensational season. Dwayne McBride, his name was. But when you looked at his numbers, the thing that popped out was that he barely was ever catching the ball out of the backfield. I think he had like 10 something receptions for the year. This guy had 99 career receptions for 827 yards and 5 touchdowns. He played his first 2 years at Tennessee and last 2 at Oklahoma. So that tells me he can catch the football. And I got to think that, the Giants want a third down back that can give Saquon a breather every once in a while. They put so much on Saquon last year, and Saquon is still young, but, running back years can be like dog years in terms of how you age in this league. Just ask Ezekiel Elliott. So I think that was an important part. But the guy also, rushed for 6.4 yards a carry last season, had 1,366 yards rushing. So he's obviously got some ability. Does it translate to the next level? Sometimes it does with these guys. But, the league has a whole history of later round running backs becoming very good players in this league, and we'll see if this guy's another one of them.
Good value. I mean, we talk about like value, obviously, like it doesn't make sense to draft a running back 2nd overall. We've been over that a million times. It was a mistake to draft Barkley where they did. Obviously there's a lot of room between number 2 and number 172. Certainly 100 in the 90s, certainly are fine spots to draft a running back. But they have a chance to get some good value here out of Gray. One thing, you look at his body type, 5'9", 207, smaller guy, but got some punch and some power to him, just from, looking at him on a thumbnail perspective here. I wonder about ball security for him. I know that, he talked briefly about that after the draft, and I think we hadn't really had a chance to like fully look, because here's what happens after this draft, by the way, if people don't know, like if you listen to the quotes coming out of these conference calls. So the Giants this is a little bit behind how the sausage is made, and it's not really that interesting, but the Giants will draft a player, and then within like 5 minutes, they put him on a conference call with reporters. So you go from like not knowing who they're going to draft to finding out who they're going to draft. You're trying to write a story about it like quickly, and then you're like put on the spot to try to ask this guy questions about who he is. So you don't really have a lot of time to prepare for, asking this guy questions. But taking a step back and looking at Eric Gray, ball security is an issue for him. He had 5 fumbles in his career. He had 6 drops in his career. Last year he only had 1 lost fumble. He had 3 lost fumbles in 2020, his first year at Tennessee. So, and I want to say, I'm basing this on PFF, right? So, drop wise, as I'm looking at their 8 million things, he had 4 drops last year. So last year was a bad drop year for him. 4 drops in 2019. So he's improved drops wise over the past 3 years, just 2 total over the past 3 years. But the fumbles, I think, like as you said, when we were texting about this, I was texting you. I was like, oh, he had 5 fumbles. You're like, 5's a lot. It is a lot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. You worry about that with a running back all the time. So that's something I'm sure that will get lots of focus when he comes in this weekend, and starting then, and it will continue throughout his career. It's not something that'll go away. I'm just going to make a point about but later round running backs being prominent guys in this league. Last year you had Tyler, and I don't know if it's Algier or Algier from the Falcons. He was a 1,000-yard rusher, 5th rounder, and Rutgers' own Isaiah Pacheco was maybe not the star of the Super Bowl, but certainly a star of the Super Bowl, and had a great rookie season with the Chiefs. So it can definitely happen in for those guys who are drafted in later rounds. So we'll see if this guy can be one of those guys. Another guy who had a great rookie season was drafted. I think he was a 4th rounder. Is Michael Carter with the Jets. He had a terrific rookie season for them, 639 yards. I don't think the Giants want Eric Gray to get as much get the ball as much as those guys did, but you never know what happens in the course of a season, and certainly we've seen Saquon go down with injuries before, so maybe he ends up having to be more prominent than they think.
Yeah, and Gary Brightwell, who had been their number 3 running back, had been, it's pretty clear he's mostly a special teams guy, and so they needed to address that. As we move down the depth or the draft pecking order here to the final 3 picks, we touched on the cornerback situation, but with Trey Hawkins out of ODU, but it's Trey Hawkins the third, by the way, which I love. His name is like 3 Hawkins 3. His name, what is it? His name is a palindrome almost, not really, but so right.
I don't know when you discovered that, or like what that moment was like for you.
When they drafted him. So they drafted him, and what happens after they draft these guys is we'll look up the scouting reports, right? And so Dane Brugler from The Athletic does like this amazing draft guide. And so I looked at the draft guide, and well, obviously the kid's real name is not Trey. It's Trey because he's whatever Hawkins the third. And I will find his real name. I forget what his actual name is here. Larry. His name is Larry. I wrote that specifically because it was in Dane Brugler's guide. Larry Trey Hawkins the third. So he's Larry Hawkins the third. Trey's his nickname, obviously, as if I haven't made that clear by saying it 600 times. So in terms of like, he's 6'2", 188 in terms of him as a player, right? So he's got good size. But I think he's probably more of a special teams guy immediately, right?
I would think so. Yeah. I mean, especially given the cornerback situation now, I'd be surprised if it was anything more than that, but you never know. You put these guys in, and as Brian Dable likes to say, let them compete and you see what happens. But when I read his bio, the thing that jumped out to me is this is a big guy, great length, good athlete, but it hasn't lived up to maybe the football part of it yet. And if I'm an NFL team, that's exactly what I want to do with my later round picks. I want to get guys with high ceilings who, rather than a guy who's, hey, this is who he is as a football player. He's not going to get any better than this. I want guys who have high ceilings. Yeah, is there a risk that he might not ever be anything? Yes, but the athleticism jumps off the page, and you see what you can do with that.
Probably bad news for Rodarius Williams, 6th-round pick in 2021, who's kind of expendable now. So we'll see. He's going to be battling for a roster spot as we look at the ripple effects of these draft picks and what this means. Even though Hawkins will be a backup, we'll see. Do you think? I wonder if you call him Larry. And I'm dating myself here. Will he react as negatively as Chipper Jones used to when he was called Larry? I don't. I think I'll just call him Trey.
I'll call him Chipper.
I don't think he's going to be getting the Larry chance from anyone. And hey, maybe he'd love that because that would mean he'd be a prominent player. But yeah, I think that's sort of where they stand in the secondary. We talked a lot about corner already, but it's worth mentioning that Rodarius Williams, heat is on him now in terms of his roster spot with this Hawkins pick.
Yeah, there was a time last year where they seemed like they wanted to give him more of a chance. But it didn't last very long.
Previous regime drafted him. It just doesn't look good for him.
Yeah.
And then as we move down here, the Jordan Riley D lineman, 7th round. Their D line right now is very well equipped to stop the run, much better than they did last year. Low bar there for what they did last year. Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, and just parenthetically, we know Dexter Lawrence is going to get paid. It's going to happen. And then the other D tackle spot, Ashawn Robinson, Raheem Nunez, Roaches, those would be their top 4 guys. And then you're looking at depth, right? So Riley fits in somewhere with Ryder Anderson and DJ Davidson for defensive line depth. And remember, Davidson coming off the torn ACL, it was early in the year.
In London, yeah.
In London, yep. So Riley's just some depth there, and they need it, right? Because I think that we'll see what Davidson can bring, but they needed someone to provide some more depth there.
Yeah, absolutely. You never have enough of those guys because they're always, they're crashing into somebody every play, so that you can think you have enough of them at one moment and then not in the next. So obviously Leonard Williams played as a very beat up player last year. Mm-hmm. So, the more depth you have along the defensive line, the better. That was Joe Shane's famous quote at the beginning of this, early in this offseason, what do you feel about the depth of your defensive line? Not good. And he addressed that throughout this offseason, including in the draft with Jordan Riley. Jordan with an O, 2 O's, by the way, Jordon.
Yeah. So I would want to have to ask him if it's Jordan. I don't know. Might be.
I didn't ask. We didn't talk to him.
He didn't do a conference call?
He did not.
Oh, okay. So
last 3 guys didn't, I don't think.
Oh, okay. Well, at
least the last 2.
Okay.
Last 3, I don't know. But
so they didn't address either linebacker position in the draft. Now, obviously, they drafted Kayvon Thibodeau high last year. Azeez Ojulari, they like him. We know Thibodeau and Ojulari are the starters. You wrote a little something today about that depth situation. They had Jihad Ward there, Tomon Fox. Who knows about Ellerson Smith? But are you concerned about the depth here at outside linebacker?
I am, mainly because, Azeez missed most of last season. I think he missed 10 games total. Not most of last season, but a good chunk of last season. Then also only played, I think, 22 snaps in the postseason because he got hurt again on a sack, of all things. He's a sack machine. I mean, 24 games, he's got 13 and a half sacks. I looked this up yesterday. Only Micah Parsons and I forget, from his draft class, Micah Parsons and the other players from the Dolphins, I can't think of his name right at this second. They're the only 2 guys with more sacks than him from his draft class. And he's played 10 fewer games than both him and Parsons, than those 2 guys. So he's a sack machine, but he hasn't stayed healthy. Kayvon was good last year, very good, but not great. He wasn't Micah Parsons in his rookie season. The Giants, for as much as they blitz, weren't a big sack team. They were middle of the pack for sacks, near the top for pressures, which you should be if you're going to blitz that much. But their number 3 pass rusher right now, a number 3 outside guy right now is Jihad Ward. And they got way more than they could have ever expected. Jihad Ward played in his 7th NFL season, played more snaps than he had at any time in his career last year. He's going to be 29. As I wrote today, he's got edge, but he's not necessarily the guy you want as an edge rusher. He definitely brings edge to the defense, but it's not as an edge so much as an edge rusher. It's just a guy who plays hard and sets a tone. So who would, I'm trying to think of the undrafted free agent. How would you pronounce his name?
They pick an undrafted free agent. I would just phonetically Habakkuk Baldonado is his last name. That's pretty easy.
I love his story. I don't even attempt to pronounce his first name.
Yeah.
But he was born in Italy, and he played 3 years of, I believe, high school football in Italy before moving to Clearwater, Florida, and playing at a school I'd never heard of, even though I spent a good 30 years of my life in Clearwater, Florida. It was a school I never heard of in my life. So he had a really good year 2 years ago at Pitt. I think he had 9 sacks 2 years ago at Pitt. I don't think you depend on a guy like that. Who would, I'm missing somebody here from this list though. Who would be the 4th guy?
Ellerson Smith, Tomas.
Smith, I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. Who got hurt last year, played quite a bit the year before. Oh, and Tamon Fox is the other guy. Yeah. The other 2 guys. Yes, Tamon Fox. They both played. Tamon Fox actually played quite a bit. He played 30% of the defensive snaps last year. But, they're not real impact pass rushers. And I'm not sure that the Giants have enough impact pass rushers right now behind their top 2 guys.
That'll be interesting to see. I mean, obviously, Ojulari needs to stay healthy and produce more. Thibodeau needs to build in his rookie year. And we know Leonard Williams got to rush the passer better. That's maybe just not who he is ultimately. But in terms of priority free agent, you say like the most notable undrafted free agents signings, I think Baldonado would be up there. Bryce Ford Wheaton is an interesting receiver from West Virginia. And then as we pivot to another area that they did not address in the draft, the other linebacker spot, like inside linebacker, this kid Deontay Johnson, I think from Toledo. Maybe he provides some depth there because really right now Bobby Okereke is their one outside linebacker. We know that. They wound up, or inside linebacker. They did not address it in the draft. So right now, Jared Davis, I mean, that's a huge weak spot. The other inside linebacker spot is they try to do a better job stopping the run. So you have Jared Davis. This will be an interesting position battle to watch. Darian Beavers coming off the torn ACL from last preseason. He probably would have started last year. And then Micah McFadden, who did not play well as a rookie last year. Maybe this guy Deontay Johnson in the mix, but ultimately, I think Beavers could really overtake Davis for that spot. But it's a big question mark. The other inside linebacker spot, another one they didn't address in the draft, right?
Yeah, I think Darian Beavers is the guy who becomes a very interesting player for this team because I hadn't even started on the beat yet, but I watched very closely as I was getting ready to cover the beat. And he was a guy who was really, I thought, impressive what I was watching in the preseason. Those are small samples, obviously. But I thought, yeah, this guy's got a chance. But at that time, again, I'm drawing a blank here. Help me. The guy they released.
Blake Martinez, yeah.
Blake Martinez, thank you. At that time, you thought Blake Martinez was going to be the other guy. It was what they went through at that position last year was remarkable. You thought it was going to be Blake Martinez. It wasn't. Tay Crowder, who's no longer here. And then he lost his job, and Micah McFadden, and they brought in. My old mind is not working today. From the former Cowboy,
Jalen Smith.
Jalen Smith, thank you. They brought in Jalen Smith.
Landon
Collins. Yeah, I mean that position was just a revolving door last year.
Yep.
And maybe it wouldn't have been if Darian Beavers had stayed healthy. Micah McFadden, his story was incredible. He was one of the, I think, 3 or 4 defensive guys who played all 17 regular season games and then didn't dress for either playoff game. Uh, and Davis, they obviously liked enough to bring back. They brought him in late in the season. He actually replaced Micah McFadden. What they went through at that position last year was amazing. The one thing you can say about that position is there's usually only one of them on the field most of the time, and that's going to be Okereke. Obviously, or pronounce his name for me.
I think it's Okereke. I mean, like I said, the Colts did a whole thing on his last name last year, and I think it's Okereke.
Okereke. All right, I'm going to go back to Bobby O.
I'd be interested in asking that because honestly, well, Joe Shane, by the way, sorry, Joe, but you don't pronounce the head coach's last name correctly. Number one, it's Dayball, Lorenzo Table. It's not Dayball. Also, he pronounces Okereke. So maybe the kid is just saying the hell with it. Just call me Okereke. But again, I'm
those paychecks show up.
I'm sure he's probably saying, you know what, go ahead and call me Okereke. You're paying me $22 million. You can call me Hey You if you want. Again, I'm looking at a Colts.com story here. Okereke. So I'm rolling with that. But anyway.
Okay, Okereke, rock and not reek.
Rock, basically. Yeah,
remember it that way. But anyway, he's going to be the guy who's on the field most of the time, as Jalen Smith was. Last year more than anybody else, he was on the field. There's times in those running downs you're going to want the second guy out there. You got to think right now that second guy is going to be Jarrett Davis. But somebody like a Beavers could push for that spot. And I never want to discount like somebody like a Mike McFadden coming back just a little bit stronger in his second year. Maybe, it's hard to get faster, but you can get stronger in between seasons. And, you're now a professional football player who's all his time is spent on, working on his game. So maybe he gets better. But they did not do a lot to address that position in the offseason. That's for sure.
Got to get better against the run. That's the bottom line. And
you can see how they've really done that right on the defensive line. And then you're going to have to hope that Bobby Okereke is, the guy you think you paid for.
For sure. And in terms of their last draft pick, Gervarius Owens, a safety, what we mentioned, he'll probably be a special teams guy initially with Pinnock and McCain competing for the one safety spot. The rest of it, where does this leave Dane Belton? I still think that Dane Belton's probably the number 2 at one of the spots. So it'll be McKinney and then a backup, either Pinnock, Belton, and then I think probably McCain at the other spot to start the year with Pinnock behind him or Belton. So, that's pretty cut and dried safety right now. Who knows what happens? But Owens looks like a special teams guy. I don't, again, don't know much about him. I mean, he was a projected. It's weird here. 4th round pick. NFL.com. Lance Zierlein projects him as a 4th rounder. And just looking through his weaknesses, I guess he dropped a couple interceptions, inconsistent field recognition. So whatever, we'll see. Again, 7th round pick. He was a 254th overall pick out of, I think there were 259 this year. So yeah. Generally you're not getting a difference maker at 254 out of 259.
Right. No. So, but he's got a uniform. He's got a chance. So he'll be in there and see what he can do. And at a position that they're, again, we're talking about depth where there's not a lot of it for the Giants. So
yeah, and perhaps he can be a guy who can. And we touched pretty much on all the position battles here in the context of this going into OTAs, but perhaps. We don't need to obviously get into special teams extensively, but when you're talking about these late round picks, perhaps he is a guy who can help the Giants in the special teams area. And it just sneakily, like the Giants stunk on special teams last year, 25th in PFF's ratings in special teams. They have not been good on special teams lately. I know we all like Thomas McGahee, terrific guy, 30th on special teams in 2021. So they got to get better there.
And that is often a reflection of roster depth, though.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Yeah, I think that should help. I mean, they're better, they're deeper. I think they should certainly be better in that area, but we'll see. So, all right. So, real quick,
we can just discuss this quick.
Yeah,
and I don't know the answer. Hopefully, you do. Who's their punt returner now?
Right, that's a great question. I mean, I don't know, right? So Richie James is gone. Man, can Jalen Hyatt do it? I don't know. I don't know if he has a lot of experience doing that. I don't need, you're not putting Wandale Robinson back there. He's hurt. Can Jamison Crowder?
They're ever doing that again.
What's that?
He said, I don't think they're ever doing that again.
Doing what?
Putting Dory Jackson back there.
Well, not Adoree Jackson. Jamison Crowder has punt return experience, but really not a lot of it since 2017 in Washington. He really didn't do it with the Jets. His last year in Washington, he didn't do it. He had 9 of them last year in Buffalo. So
Jalen Hyatt had 0 punt returns and 0 kick returns in his college career.
Yeah, there you go. So 95 career punt returns for Jamison Crowder. He'll be in the mix. Does Gray have anything in that area? I don't know. I really haven't.
Eric Gray he had 9 punt returns, 4 kick returns, so not a whole lot of experience.
And ball security issues, as we mentioned.
And he averaged 5.2 yards on his 9 punt returns and 18 yards on his 4 kick returns. So not a real explosive guy in that regard. So they still have Brightwell to return kicks.
Yeah.
So
obviously punt return matters significantly more in terms of the impact in the game. Just because there's so many touchbacks. But we're not going to go through and grade every pick here. But what we will do, first of all, we had draft grades that went up right after the draft. So if you guys want to go and look, and gals, NJ.com/Giants, obviously, for all our coverage, and then on there our pick by pick grades, and then overall grades. We did it. I can remind you of yours. You gave Joe Shane an A for this draft. I gave him an A-. And just real quick, I mean, I'll sum it up, and then we'll put a bow on this. But A- here for me. He addressed what he needed to do. He was aggressive. He addressed these positions. Obviously, when you're trading up like that and you sacrifice 4 picks for Waller, Banks, Hyatt, then you're going to not be able to do things like pick an inside linebacker, outside linebacker depth, or really a significant safety. Okay, we'll see it. We'll see how that works out. Obviously, a ton of pressure on these top 3 picks to be difference makers when you operate like this. So we'll see. I mean, I think that the Hyatt picks got a bunch of pressure on it. They gave up a 4th round pick for him. Banks is inherently pressure, and Schmitz do too because of where they were picked. So, I mean, A- for me, it's kind of arbitrary. But why do you? You touched on it earlier, but A for you, and what do you like about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning here. I think he aced it in the first 2 days when he got those first 3 guys in the draft. Banks, you addressed your cornerback need. You got a starting cornerback now. Schmidt, you addressed your interior line. You got a center now that you need it. And Jalen Hyatt, you got a first or second round, early second round talent, at least by everything I've read. In the 3rd round, you aced it right there. And then I think I thought they needed to draft a running back in this draft, not because of Saquon Barkley's situation, but just because they needed to get a little younger depth at that position. And 4th or 5th round seemed like the right place to do that. That's where he got it. And the rest of the draft, I think you're taking guys who, you hope you can develop. They are developmental guys in the 6th and 7th round. We'll see what those guys become, but it just, it's almost like it's discerning between those 6th and 7th round guys and the guys you bring in as undrafted guys. There's not a major difference at that point. Some of those guys probably could have been drafted that are going to be on the undrafted list when the Giants put out their official undrafted list. So I don't even really look at a grade after really the fourth or fifth round. So, I just think they did what they needed to do. The one thing I will say, and I wrote about this the other day too, is so they aced the draft. That I think it was I think Pro Football Focus gave them an A+ for their draft. Problem is the Eagles got an A++. The team you're chasing,
plus. Wow.
They just got an A+, but
Oh.
but in addition to being an A+, I think Pro Football Focus listed 3 winners and 3 losers of the draft, and their first winner was the Eagles for just playing the draft in a perfect way. Now the other exercise I did, because I'd go down these rabbit holes when I start doing these things, was to look at where like NFL.com their immediate grades of drafts last year and where those teams ended up. And a lot of people had the Seattle Seahawks of having one of the worst drafts last year. As it turned out, they had 6 rookies play a prominent role for a team that shocked everybody and made the playoffs. So how much are these things worth? The Eagles last year were a very highly graded team. As it turned out, they didn't need Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean to play prominent roles, because they had, they basically allowed those guys to have redshirt NFL seasons, and we'll find out about that draft for them this year. But it wasn't as significant, didn't help them significantly this year. But it just looks like, again, everything on paper, Joe Shane alluded to this, nobody's ever won a game in April. Like the Eagles and Giants both had good drafts. So did that allow the Giants to pass the Eagles? I think that's probably doubtful. But the other team that the Giants seem to have been chasing forever now is the Cowboys. I can see a scenario where the Giants are better than the Cowboys in 2023, especially because I think it's a legitimate concern that Dak Prescott is going the other way. Obviously they released Ezekiel Elliott. So I think the Giants have gotten better, but maybe the team they're ultimately chasing also got better this offseason.
For sure. Good points all in terms of the big picture there with the NFC East, and obviously an aggressive top-heavy draft for the Giants. And that's where they stand. And we will be back. So be sure to check out our coverage, NJ.com/Giants, of rookie minicamp this coming weekend, of the schedule next Thursday, May 11th. And as I mentioned, we'll be back here in about a week and a half on May the 12th, the Friday, and we will discuss all things schedule. It will just be a schedule thing. We'll just talk about the schedule, hard games, whatever. We know the home and road opponents. Everyone knows that. This is really just the order of the games, which matters. And we'll do game-by-game picks and all that. Yeah, worthless but fun stuff. So in the meantime, be sure to like, rate, review, subscribe to us on all your favorite podcasting platforms. Check out our stuff on NJ.com/Giants, and we will be back with you guys here sooner rather than later. Have a great rest of your week and weekend. Take care.